Steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another video. This time we're going to review a 66 Lincoln Continental Convertible. You probably saw on the thumbnail. Definitely stick with me to the end. I'll let you know what I think this car will sell for, and we will jump into the deep dive now. I did want to mention, when you go to bring a trailer, when I did a recent review on this 30-year owned 66, I noticed for whatever reason they didn't have their normal VIN breakdown in here. And I didn't notice that until after the video was recorded. So one thing I've always given credit to Bring a Trailer is I love how they break down, or decode, if you will, the door tag, which reveals some vital information, and that's going to reveal some vital information on this car. So if we take a look, we obviously see a 66 red Lincoln Continental Convertible. We know it's a 66 because, number one, the description. Number two, we've got the Lincoln emblem on the front, which differentiates the 66 to 67. That's an easy way. And as I've always said, there are a few less bars, if you will, on this front grille. This 66 convertible was sold new in Missouri, is what they say, and was had remained with the same family until the selling dealer's acquisition in 2022. So you could argue that this is basically, from what we get from that, it's a two-owner car. Of course, it has a 462. Some of this is some basic information here. And they said that the convertible is now offered by the selling dealer with service records and a clean Missouri title. Now, this is a key thing that we're going to see. This car left the factory with Spanish moss metallic. Now, if you do a quick Google search, this is what Spanish moss looks like. So this was a green car. This is more of a rare color, I would say, as far as my travels, but that is a key thing, because someone that's looking for a specific, maybe a more of an original car is not going to find it with this one. Okay, it's not necessarily a deal breaker for most. A lot of people are going to like maybe the red versus the green, but it is worth noting that there's some basic information here. They go on to just mention some updates were made. It does say that it has helper springs in the back. I don't think that we can see that in any of the photos. Now, they do say the refreshed cabin. They go on to kind of say some of the updates that were made. Now, I will tell you, obviously, when we look at the VIN breakdown, or the door code, if you will, this obviously wasn't the original interior color as well. So a lot of folks are going to maybe want an original car. You won't find it, as I said, with this one. The other thing that's worth noting is I do not believe the interior ever came in red. We know that this obviously wouldn't have been the color if it was green, the Spanish moss, but that would mean that, the interior, just so everybody knows, would have been painted. I think the correct term, when you're dealing with interior stuff, is dyed. So we'll kind of see a little bit of that when we look at some of the close-up photos. But I will say this is a great color combo for someone that's not looking for a factory correct Lincoln Continental convertible. And if you're a fan of red, certainly this is going to be a car that's going to appeal to you. The 5-digit odometer shows about 2,800 miles. I think we would all assume that has rolled over. Certainly, if one family owned this car for all those years, I think we could all agree that it was driven, over 100,000 miles, and that's great. We'd rather see a car that is driven, and of course, with this car, just having over 100,000 miles, that's nothing for a 60-year-old car, if that makes sense. A lot of this is basic. It does kind of mention the air condition refrigerant, so we would assume that is working. This is an AC car, which we'll see that. Underneath the car, this is how these cars typically look, and I always tell people this shouldn't necessarily deter you. When you see kind of the oil stains and some of the drips and leaks. I mean, these cars do leak a little bit over the course of time, and this is certainly kind of traditionally how they do look. Again, kudos to Bring a Trailer. I'm not affiliated with them, but they always typically, except for that last listing for whatever reason, they do a great job of obtaining the door tag, then they break it down. So the reason why I mentioned at the beginning is because, again, it tells the story that, this is not the original paint. This was not a red car from the factory. It also had the Palomino leather, which was available earlier in the series, I think in 64, but it was like one of those rare things, and I think they brought it back, if I remember correctly. Being that this was a 66, the date would have been November 6th, so 11/6 of 65, right, in preparation as they're building for that 66 model year. It was in New York DSO, so the destination or ordering sales office, if you will. But what we saw in the story above is that it was sold in Missouri. And that certainly is possible. It could have been a dealer transfer or whatever. So that's not atypical. Now, there are a few videos here, and I give them kudos because a lot of these different listings don't always include videos. Bring a Trailer does a great job because if they catch wind that people are asking for videos and the owner goes out and does a video, Bring a Trailer will add those to the listing, right? So they're kind of front and center. It gives you a little bit of insight if you kind of slow this down a little bit, which I'm having a hard time doing here, in terms of the interior. Again, someone that's looking for a factory original car, this one, there could be good and bad. I think the good is that, it's been redone, right? It's better than getting a car that needs to have the interior redone. I wouldn't say that there's any bad to it. It just would be if you're looking for a factory correct car. Like I said, this is not going to be the color combination that it came with. Again, not necessarily a deal breaker. They do a good job of showing all this. Again, I'm 98% sure red, even if you could get a red car, which you could in this year, the dash wouldn't have been that color and things like that. But it is different. And I think that's a cool thing, especially if you like red. I have a red 65, ironically, with red interior, and I absolutely love it. What's ironic is the dash in my 65 is red. And again, I do not believe in 66 you could have got a red dash, but based upon the interior color being Palomino, it wouldn't have been a red dash. So enough of that. This is another good thing. They have a 1-minute video showing the top operation. So that's going to be key. For those that don't know, this is a very good point to stop for a moment. Many of you probably know this, but if you don't, in 66 and 67, you do have a glass back window. That's super cool. People have asked over the years, could you somehow retrofit the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with a glass back window? And really the answer is no. I mean, anything is possible, but certainly if you just look at it, it will not work. This was a nice update that Lincoln made in 66, and it's not just an easy kind of bolt in, if you will. This is a lot of engineering that kind of went into this, but it is super cool that you do have that glass back window, and that kind of just helps because over the course of time, the earlier year Lincolns, you'll have to eventually probably replace the top, and then you'll get the new back window, which will kind of usually sometimes be a little bit hard to see out of. In my 64, it's a very old top on there, and it's like I can't even see out of the back. So anyways. They also have a quick driving video, and that's fantastic, just showing that the car's operation and things like that. So that's a good thing. Now, we want to get into the meat and potatoes. Now, if we jump over to the Lincoln Registry, I did check. The VIN was entered just this week, so the gentleman that does this does a great job of capturing these Lincolns all throughout the web. And you can see on Haggerty, the price range is going to be from $26K all the way to $104. This is an air-conditioned car, so it's going to, add plus 10% per Haggerty. If we take a look, I will say this car, like many of these, is not perfect. And it's rare to find a perfect 60s Lincoln, right? These cars were mostly driven. They were enjoyed. They're big cars, oftentimes referred to as, quote, boats. And you can see like there are a couple dents and dings on this car. Again, it's not perfect, but that is that's just the way it goes. Now, in one of my recent other reviews, I kind of talked about the spacing in between the front bumper. This one looks really good on the bottom. The top looks a little bit off here. It could just be this trim. It's like a stainless trim that goes all around this metal here, and you can kind of see it appears, at least in this photo, that it's sagging just a little bit, so it's not perfectly straight across. I would want to kind of see what that looks like in person, but certainly that's what we can kind of see in the photo. The chrome looks good from what we can see. I think the paint looks good as well. So if you're a fan of this red, certainly this is gonna be something that you're going to be drawn towards. We can also see it does have the feature for the key. So for those that don't know, you insert the key here by the gas filler, and then you're able to turn it left or turn it right to put the top up or put the top down. This is fantastic if you're golfing. Believe it or not, golf clubs will fit in the trunk of this car with the top down in the trunk. So you could, if you finish golfing, you could come insert your key here, turn it to, I think, the right. The deck lid's going to come open. You could put your golf clubs in, and you can turn it back to the left, and then the top is going to go. The deck lid's going to go back down. Looking at everything here, these non-close-up photos, again, it looks nice. I think they did a good job of bringing the car out to a place where it can be photographed very nicely. We don't always see this, especially on non-bring-a-trailer listings. I recently did an eBay listing, and it just did not have good photos. And if you think about the importance of the photos, oftentimes these folks aren't going to be traveling to said car, and they're going to have to rely specifically on the photos. So, having good photos is going to be a key thing. This grill looks really nice. I've talked a little bit in the past that these are pot metal, and over the course of time, you can start to see on some of these grills some pitting. But what I can see on this grill, I don't know if it was redone, but it looks really, really nice, which is fantastic. All of the letters appear here for the word Continental. That's key because these letters are getting a little bit expensive if you can find them. And it is typical sometimes to kind of see them sticking out a little bit, the way they push in there. So you can see the eye is kind of sticking out just a hair. What I'm going to do here is they have a ton of photos you can see, so I am going to jump around a little bit. So we can kind of just get a good review of this listing. If you like the red and you like the white, I think it does bode well, which is fantastic. They do a good job of showing some of the weather stripping, and I've talked about the weather stripping on these cars is not cheap. I always recommend steel rubber, and that's STEELE. Yeah, we've had them on our podcast before, and that's one thing that if I were looking to buy this car that I would do over the course of time is start acquiring some pieces from steel and start changing out all that weather stripping. It can become expensive, but it is what it is. It's going to add value to the car. What we can see here, it does have the AM FM radio, which I think was more standard in 66. I forget if it was an option, but prior years it was an option to have FM. This is what I was kind of talking about when you look at the dyeing or the painting, however you want to state it. You can see some little, kind of blotches and things like that, and that's because this was not originally the red color. Again, I don't think it necessarily takes anything away from it, but it is something just to kind of point out. Because this is a two-owner car and mostly a one-owner car up until just a couple of years ago, they do have this original piece here, and that would have been, for those many of you know, when you bought the car, Lincoln would have provided this kind of nameplate that would go typically right here. This is where they would put it on the different ears to showcase, the original owner. We can see that it does have the flashers. This was first available. I've seen some different things, but really in 65, it was a feature. I have one for my 65. I've seen people talk about in 64, you could have got it, but it's not plug and play and that type of thing. But I would say by 66, I think it was standard. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But in 65, it's definitely rare. And that feature, if you will, is kind of underrated because God forbid you break down and it's nighttime out, or you lose power, or your battery dies and you're sitting in the middle of the road and it's blackout. It is nice to have flashers. Now, of course, if your battery dies, you're not going to have it anyways. But I've helped a couple people in the past in the middle of the road. They still had battery power. The car died out, and it was super nice to have the flashers on, which is kind of a nice thing. They do a good job of showcasing, again, underneath the doors. It's not perfect. You can kind of see in here where the repaint, is not perfect. And that's going to be something that you're dealing with if you had a car that was repainted like this one was 25 years ago. And I think around 2000, they said. We can see the weather stripping is kind of falling a little bit here. It looks like it's pushed out from that one clip. This is a car, too, that, you could end up going, hey, I want to redo the interior to a different color. Maybe you want a red interior. Maybe you want a different color. Maybe you want to redo the white. And Jim Wallace in Florida, he sells on eBay. He makes the kits for these cars if that's something that you wanted to do. In the engine, we, of course, have the 462, which was used from 66 midway through the 68 model year. It's a very strong engine, which is fantastic. It was factory blue, just like what you're seeing here. They also moved the coil up in front of the air cleaner, which makes it way easier to change if you have to. We can see that it has a dual reservoir, so that's fantastic. That didn't come factory until 67. However, I always recommend that you update it because, as someone just chimed in on one of my posts the other day, years ago, he saw someone that had a single pot. The brake booster, or excuse me, the reservoir gave out, and then the person smashed into another car. So when you have a dual reservoir, it allows for, if God forbid one of these sides of it goes out, you still have some brakes. I know that's kind of rare, but it can happen. We can see that it has the 3-port carder. So again, if it was a 2-port, it would have the 2 screws or bolts, if you will, on top of it. But it does have the 3-port, which is fantastic, which means it has that nice return line that goes all the way back to the gas tank. This is not something that you... I would say this is not atypical. A lot of times these manifolds will look like this. Sometimes these manifolds will leak, and you'll hear like a little bit of a popping sound, and you can sometimes hear that in the videos. But certainly that's something, if I were to acquire this car, you can buy the manifolds, which is great, from places like Lincoln Land, and then you would obviously have a mechanic shop or do it yourself. You would have to, you would put new gaskets in as well, and that would typically remedy if there was any kind of exhaust leak, if that makes sense. Now, I don't know how concerning this would be to most. They do show some photos here of a little bit of kind of grittiness. This would be on the driver's side because this is the front of the car up here. You can see the springs. They do show a little bit of someone maybe came in here at some point and kind of welded this up a little bit. Unfortunately, we're not going to really know how bad this is unless we saw it in person. But they do a good job of showing other parts of the undercarriage, and it does look really nice. This looks pretty typical from what you'll see in these different cars. There's a little bit of kind of corrosion and stuff here. This doesn't look too bad compared to the first one we looked at. But underneath the car, what it looks like is it's pretty original. These bolts here, these look like grade 8 bolts, the kind of newer style bolts. So that would maybe lead me to believe that at some point the trans was dropped. I don't think that they mentioned anything about it being rebuilt. It would be a C6 transmission, which would be easier to rebuild for a lot of shops around the country, depending on where you live. In closing, there is a bunch of literature, which they mentioned. There's some old photos, which I think is fantastic. You could see that this car, obviously, this is when it was being painted because the door handles are off, right? So this would have been like circa 2000, which kind of reinforces that, hey, this car's been done a while. That's a good thing because it means it's not a lipstick job. In this documentation here, they mention a 67 Lincoln. However, keep in mind this is a 66, so I wanted to point that out. In my opinion, as I close this video down is unfortunately, I don't think that I'm going to get this video out before, because I have a couple other in the pipeline already. So it's going to end probably before you see this video, but it's at 40,000 now. If we look at Haggerty, we would see an excellent condition at 77.5. Being that this is a convertible and so many people want these convertibles and red is a desirable color, I would say my gut feeling is it is going to top the 60, and it's going to go between 60 and 70,000. Now, I could be off. I wouldn't be surprised if it tops out at 55, maybe because folks are concerned about the undercarriage. But my gut feeling is it's going to go 60 to 70, and we will see. I could be right. I could be wrong. It is sometimes hard to gauge these cars. Again, this is what it would have originally looked like in the Spanish Moss. I did look at the VIN here. This VIN ends in 6.4. And this VIN ends in 6.8. So it was not the same car. I thought for a moment that it may have been when I first started this, but it wasn't. Stay on the rise, everyone. Check out Lincoln Addict Podcast however you find podcasts. I appreciate all the support.